Today we continue our series, All Things Celtic, and today's presentation will be on Celtic culture and heritage. No better day than St. Patrick's Day to celebrate such a thing. On behalf of the entire Alumni Relations team, I want to thank the many people who have offered their expertise or suggested a topic, and I would encourage you to contact the Alumni Relations Office if you have a suggestion for future programs. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Father Jerome Day. Father Jerome Joseph Day is a member of the Benedictine community. He teaches English and communication at St. Anselm College. His work includes journalism, political rhetoric, and discourse analysis. And since 2002, he has served as pastor of our parish, St. Raphael the Archangel in Manchester. Father Jerome was a native of North Adams, Massachusetts, and a 1975 graduate of St. Anselm College with a degree in English. He holds master's degrees in Anglo-Irish Studies from University College Dublin, Irish Theater from Trinity College Dublin, Dogmatic Theology from St. John's Seminary in Boston, and in 2001 he earned his doctorate from McGill University in Montreal. He is a member of many academic and learned societies and continues to teach, research, and publish on the rhetoric and discourse of the Irish famine and US elections. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the college's website. There is a Q&A button on your screen, so please feel free to submit questions throughout today's webinar. And now I'll turn it over now to Father Jerome, who will continue with us on our Celtic journey. So Father Jerome, take it away.
Thanks, Father Bennett. It's good to be with you. Everybody, I think, has had one of those days. The garbage collector managed to get stuck. The dishwasher managed to overflow and flood the kitchen. Then I got up to college and my car's battery died. So hence the delay. I'm sorry for that. None of those things is part of Irish culture. They're probably part of American culture, and culture is as it is. So we're going to take a look at Irish culture. We're going to kind of look at it in a little bit in the frame of Irish dance. And I'll explain that as we go along. So welcome everybody. It's good to be back with you. And maybe Patrice can open that up so we can see the screen. There you are. Look at those five lassies coming at you. They're great gals. And that is the traditional outfit that Irish step dancers, from little toddlers right up to through grown women and men would wear. The men obviously wouldn't wear the dresses. They would wear a kind of a waistcoat and slacks and so forth. But it is a very stylized form of dancing. Although Irish dance in the last, let's say in the last 10, 20 years has become kind of avant-garde. We'll see an example of that in a minute. I have to say, I don't know if those girls are having a bad hair day or an excellent hair day, but I used to think that that was their own hair. As it happens, they're usually, for most dancers, they are wigs that they have. And I could never figure out how they could get their hair in that condition so quickly. But when they dance, you can imagine that it bounces and becomes part of the kinetic energy of the dance. So we go to the next slide, maybe. And so, as I think I spoke about when we did the saints, Ireland is a relatively small country. It's about the size of Maine, but culturally, as well as religiously, as well as historically, it has often punched above its weight. Next. It's a land, Ireland, where history and legend really mingle, where the spirit can soar to the greatest heights of contemplation, poetry, art, and yet it is sadly a land where blood is spilled often. There's a very tempestuous history, and it is likewise a land where imagination and history wrestle for dominance. Some of what I'm telling you is hard and fast history. Some of it is imagination. And yet, where would we be as human beings if we did not have imagination. Next. Ireland's history includes a long record of poverty and famine, frequent famines, and then the epic famine in the 1840s, called by the Irish An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, and certainly colonial domination by our neighbors in Great Britain, the English, and then later as the British in the United Kingdom, treated Ireland rather roughly, and it was a tough time. We'll see some of that. But Ireland today is a full member of the European Union. It entered with Great Britain, the UK in the 1970s. Unfortunately, Britain has left the EU, but Ireland has remained. But even that has complicated their relations, because many of you know that the 6 northern counties of Ireland are still part of the United Kingdom. And yet the Belfast Peace Accords of 1999, which ended the Troubles, or at least began the end of the Troubles, envision a seamless border. There is no noticeable border between the 6 counties of Northern Ireland and the 26 counties of Southern Ireland. Ireland right now has a seat on the United Nations Security Council. I believe it is the 3rd time the Irish Republic has been represented there, and they are looking forward to making a bit of an impact on the world. And most people now see Ireland very much as a first world nation. So we'll see some of those factors in a minute. Next. We spoke last week about the religious heritage, and what one wonders does religion create a community in Ireland, or is it a source of contention? And of course, the answer to that is both. Irish religious experience goes all the way back to the Druids and is still reflected in the contemporary Christian love for nature in the Irish context. Christianity came to Ireland in the year 432 with St. Patrick. And soon after Patrick's death, the entire island had become Christian and became known as the Isle of Saints and Scholars. You remember that, of course, during the so-called Dark Ages in Europe, it was never entirely dark, but it was certainly a problematic time. Ireland provided the light of learning, and people would come from all over Europe. I don't know if they came as far away from as Hungary, Bennett, but they certainly came from the far distant places. And there is a bit of a history between Ireland and Hungary that, if I have time, I'll mention. But in any event, things became quite complicated during the time of the Reformation. England and Scotland went over to Protestantism, and Ireland remained a Catholic country, so there was more than a little violence. And now all of the churches in Ireland are struggling with the effects of the clergy scandal and contemporary secularism. What you see there in the picture, you see the 3 patron saints of Ireland, the Hiberniae Patroni, St. Patrick in the middle, St. Bridget to our right, and St. Columba or St. Columcille to our left. And all of them had experience as monks. Bridget was a vowed nun, so therefore a female monk in a sense, and Columba and Patrick were both monks as well. Next one. Here's a famous monk. You may have heard me talk about St. Brendan the last time. St. Brendan was a monk, a priest, an abbot, and an explorer. He explored the coasts of Ireland and then went up across Ireland and up the Scottish coast, and even went back to Europe. There is legend that he sailed to Rome in a stone boat. I don't know how much you want to take that for seriousness, but it is a claim. But one of the most interesting parts of St. Brendan is what they call the Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis. It's the story of the sailings, the voyages of St. Brendan the abbot. And in it, the writer tells the story that Brendan managed with a band of brothers to create a large curragh, a leather and wooden boat that is common in the west of Ireland even to this day. And they rigged it up and they set sail. And they went up the coast of Ireland, across to Scotland, up to the Hebrides Islands, across to the Faroe Islands, and then across to, sailing west, across to Iceland, and then on to Greenland. And then they found the Isle of the Blessed. And if you read that story of the voyages, they sound very much like the coast of New England and maritime Canada. And it is claimed that St. Brendan discovered America long before Leif Erikson got here and long before Christopher Columbus did. And ironically, the record of the Navigatio was available to Columbus. Columbus, according to the record, consulted it. So who knows? Maybe someday we'll find the remains of St. Brendan's monastery in America, if there is such a one. Next one, please. The Irish interest in death is been historic, even in pre-Christian times. This is a Neolithic tomb found in Connemara. They call these kinds of constructions dolmens, and you find them periodically in Connemara, that part of Galway that is really quite wild and rather barren. Next. A much more elaborate tomb is Newgrange. That's in County Meath in the center of Ireland and the Midlands. And this tomb is older than the pyramids of Egypt. It is a royal tomb, and they found a number of things in it. But what is most interesting is that it's aligned with the light. So the spring and winter solstices, light pierces into the chambers of this tomb. It's become quite a visitor's attraction in Ireland, and it was only made widely known for about 30 years or so. So it's quite a place. Next. As I mentioned also last week, one of the great places in Ireland, at least by my reckoning, is Glendalough, the Valley of the Two Lakes. It was a monastic center founded by St. Kevin of Glendalough, probably around the year 800 or so. And eventually it became what we might call not only a monastery, but a proto-university for Europe. There were literally thousands of monks and students who lived in Glendalough, and the students had come from the British Isles as well as from Europe to learn from the monks, just as they come to the hilltop at St. Anselm to learn from the monks and our many lay collaborators. Next. Another place that I find beautiful and very moving is the Rock of Cashel. This is very near to where my family lives in County Tipperary, my mother's people. And it is an ancient royal center that eventually became a Christian citadel. There are two cathedrals, one Gothic and one Romanesque. There is the Roundstone Tower. There's a school. There's quite a bit of material there. And it is massive. It's one of the most impressive ruins in Ireland. Next. St. Patrick was there, as a matter of fact, and converted the High King. This is a painting by Paul Henry, a well-known artist, American artist, I believe, from about the 30s, I think, of an Irish high cross. And those crosses tell a story. You can see the carvings as depicted, and they tell stories of the lives of the saints and the lives of Christ and the lives of any number of figures from the biblical record. So very impressive and beautiful. The Rock of Cashel again, the pre-Norman Round Tower. The Round Tower, by the way, was a way people in Ireland protected themselves from marauding tribes and eventually from the Vikings. They would climb up by ladders into the doorway, which was quite high up. Then they would seal the door and go up to the chambers at top. And it worked very well for quite a while. Eventually the Vikings realized that if they started a fire underneath the tower, they could turn it into a chimney and smoke people out and then slay them. So it was not a fail-safe method. Oh, and palace was another thing that was on the Rock of Cashel. So next one, please. Now, another early structure in Ireland, we're going to be looking at a lot of the built environment of Ireland in this slideshow is a famous Christ Church Cathedral founded by St. Lawrence O'Toole, another one we mentioned in the last video. It comes from the late 1100s and early 1200s. It's the 12th century, not the century, but spelling is perhaps a challenge here. When you type these things in, I don't know if you've tried this, but they're so small you can't even see the errors. And then when they get blown up, they're very big. But there it is. Anyway, the cathedral is the cathedral for the city of Dublin, for the Church of Ireland now. It's part of the Anglican Communion. And that happened after the Reformation. Dublin, it's worth remembering, was established as a Viking stronghold. The Irish did not have cities. They later moved into the Viking cities and then eventually established their own. But Dublin's history goes back to an Irish settlement, but it was certainly not a city. It's the Vikings who turned it into a city. And then later, in around the year 1170, the Norman invaders, the same folks who invaded England in 1066, roughly a century later, invade Ireland to help settle a local squabble. And oddly enough, these Normans, who were understood to be English at this stage of the game, were invited to invade by one of the Irish nobles, and actually an Irish king, to help him settle accounts with an enemy. Next slide. One of the great artifacts of Ireland, we're moving now from the built environment to the book culture. Ireland needs little instruction from any nation with regard to the value of learning and the importance of scholarship and the importance of imaginative literature. This is the contribution the monks made to the copying, the production of books. All of them had to be hand copied, as most people know, and then in many places they were illuminated. The light was brought to them, so to speak, through color and pigmentation. The Book of Kells was actually made on the island of Iona, established by St. Columba. You see the connection, the interconnections now. But then some years later was transferred to the monastery at Kells, which is inland. I believe it's in southern Leinster or western Munster. Those are the provinces of Ireland, for safekeeping, because the coastal communities were raided by the Vikings quite a bit. It is regarded, the Book of Kells, as the most precious artifact in the nation, other than Ireland's children and her people generally. It is now held by Trinity College, Dublin, and I'm happy to say I had the opportunity to go in and look at the exhibition often. And I always found it fascinating and very moving to be in the presence of this beautiful book. It is, in fact, a copy of the four Gospels. And the Book of Kells is actually the four books of Kells. I don't believe they're strictly organized according to each Gospel, but there are four volumes that contain the four Gospels, and very, very beautiful production. That large P there is actually the Greek letter for Kiro. The Greek name for Jesus, the Christos, and it begins accordingly. So you can see the elaborate nature of that design. Next one, please. Here's one of another illustration in the Book of Kells. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the Book of Kells is one of only many, many, many medieval manuscripts. And the manuscripts are usually written on vellum, that is to say sheepskin hide. The inks come from pigments from the known world, around the world. And the artistic tradition, although Celtic, and you see there the knot design dominates, but many other traditions, including the Viking, the Byzantine, and the Roman tradition. And from the scriptures, we get the symbols. So in the upper left, you see the angel of Matthew. You see the lion of Mark on the right. And down below, you see the ox of Luke. And finally, on the lower right, you see the eagle of St. John. Okay. And the script that is used in most of the written part of the Book of Kells is called Insular Unical, and it looks very much, this is an example of that. Next. Christ obviously is depicted in the Book of Kells. It's the New Testament, it's the story of the life of Jesus, his teachings, and many of the activities of his life. That, if you're familiar with the iconic tradition of the Byzantine world, should be familiar to you, seeing pictures of Christ enthroned in majesty. And that is the Irish contribution to that artistic tradition. In Greek, it is called the Christos Pantokrator, in other words, Christ, the all-ruler. And you see the angels and some designs of birds that look like peacocks. Peacocks are often associated with Jesus, but that's a very powerful. I have actually a copy of that particular image in my office here at St. Raphael. It's over the fireplace. Next one. And then Mary, of course, is very prominent in the Gospels and very important in our faith. And you see a picture of our Blessed Lady seated in the pose of Our Lady's seat of wisdom. And therefore, because she's holding the source of all wisdom, Jesus himself. Mary was often called Mary of the Gael because the devotion of the Gaelic people to her was so great. Sometimes she's called Mega Mahar Nade. In other words, Mary, Mother of God. This is as far as I know, this is the only image of Jesus with a mustache that I have seen, but the Celts were not above having a little fun with it. But in fact, Jesus is depicted not as an infant or a young child, a toddler, but rather as a little man, because the artists want to show that he is endowed with all wisdom. He has the experience of the years. Next. Okay, we can skip that. That didn't currently come out. This is the interior of St. Patrick's Cathedral. This is one of the other cathedrals in Dublin. And then there's St. Mary's Pro Cathedral, which is the Catholic cathedral. The two ancient cathedrals, Christ Church and Patrick's, were both taken by the people who were ruling the country. That would be the Anglo-Irish or the English, and they continue to use them. But it's a very lovely. This is more in line. St. Patrick's looks a little bit more like the French cathedrals, and you can see that the Christ Church looks much more like the Romanesque cathedrals. When I say French cathedrals, I'm speaking of the large number of Gothic cathedrals in France. Okay, next one. Now, another famous institution is where I was privileged to attend as a student, studying Irish theater as part of the work that I did for the doctorate. Trinity College is also known as the University of Dublin. It was intended, when it was established in 1591, to be known as the University of Dublin, and Trinity would be one of its constituent colleges, much as Oxford and Cambridge have 25 to 30 or so colleges attached to them. They are made up of those colleges. Trinity was envisioned as the school for the Protestants, and the next college would have been King's College, which was envisioned for the Catholics. But violence and political strife intervened, and the plan was not realized. So Trinity College is the fullness of the University of Dublin, and the University of Dublin subsists entirely within Trinity College. Among the alumni of Trinity would be Jonathan Swift, Oliver Goldsmith, Lecky, the famous historian, Samuel Beckett, Oscar Wilde, John Millington Synge, Bram Stoker, the writer of Dracula, and Seamus Heaney, a Nobel Prize winning poet laureate, and really the key poet of the modern age in Ireland. So a very beautiful place. Many times I'd walk through that gate. It's also where you hung out if you wanted to beat somebody with whom you had a pre-existing arrangement, so to speak. And there's a kind of a house. That's once you go through that gate, this is what you see. Magnificent bell tower. On this side here is the examination hall, and on this side, there is the college refectory and the chapel. That's the chapel on the left. And the Catholics have a large room within that where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, and Mass is often celebrated. And if it's a big group, they use the more general chapel. But for many years, Trinity would not admit Catholics unless you were planning to convert to Anglicanism. And even if you could get into Trinity, the Catholic Church would excommunicate you if you entered. So it was quite a strange feeling for me to walk through the gates of Trinity College, knowing that my grandfather, who was Irish born, would not have been allowed in. But here's his grandson who's allowed and welcomed in. So thanks be to God that there have been a lot of changes that improve things for everybody in Ireland. Okay, next one. This is a picture of the long room, which is one of it's really the rare book library for Trinity. Trinity is one of the largest libraries in the world among universities, and partly because when Ireland was part of the United Kingdom, early on, the British Parliament passed a law saying that every book published in the British Empire had to be turned over to Oxford, Cambridge, or Dublin for their libraries, and that is still honored to this day. So it's quite a way of getting your books. It would be nice if the Geisel Library had something like that as an arrangement. And you see the busts of the various historical and literary figures. Just this past year, Trinity reorganized a little bit, and for the first time, they've introduced some of the famous women writers of Ireland into that gallery of famous figures. It was quite a moment when the first lady was unveiled. Okay. This is just an artist's rendering of a new center for Trinity, an innovation center. There brings their business department, their computer people, and their economics department together to be an incubator for innovation for the university, but also for the whole of the nation. Next one. Another feature of culture in Ireland is obviously the living space. And although some of the modern Irish homes are as well appointed and as lovely as anything we would find in any of our upscale communities in New England, the Irish squares, public squares like Fitzwilliam Square, are done up in Georgian architecture. And they have a lot of trees and very beautiful facades to the houses. And they often have these very elaborate window treatments with the front door. You see the transom over the top and the windows on the side, the bright colors of the doors. These are all just ways of bringing a little bit of life and light into the home. And they're very attractive. Next one. There's an example of vines on one of those homes. You'd be spending hundreds of thousands of pounds or of euros to get a home on any of those squares in Ireland now. Very expensive. Next one. This is the famous General Post Office downtown on O'Connell Street. It's where in 1916 the Irish Rising erupted, but it was built in 1813, I think. It was kind of late in the age, but it is a very beautiful building. And on top, you can see the statue of Hibernia with her spear to defend the country, holding the harp, which is the heart of the country. The national symbol of Ireland is a harp. The only nation I know that has a musical instrument as its national symbol, not rather an instrument of war, but an instrument of the arts and of peace. On the left-hand side for us is a figure of the god Mercury, or yeah, he has a Greek name and it's gone right out of my head. Hermes, who was the messenger of the gods. And then on the other side, you'll see an image of Fidelita, who is faithfulness. And so in other words, saying that the post office will get your messages out throughout the country, and they will be faithful to the job. So it's but a lot of the fighting of the 1916 Rising took place in the General Post Office, and it is where the proclamation of the Irish Republic was first read out. So next one, please. Another elegant building designed by James Gandon in the 1780s, I think. This is the building that if you were sending a ship into Dublin, you have to pay the custom duties there at that office, and the ships would line up on that part of the river, and people would go in and pay their fees. It's now part of the Irish government offices, I think, for the Ministry for the Interior, and which is like the home office, and also for housing. You see the dome. You see over here on the right and left sides of the building, the Irish coat of arms under British rule. You have the British lion and the Scottish unicorn on either side, and you have the harp in the center, and it's crowned. So very interesting symbol, and kept during the days of the Irish Republic. Okay, next one. Another feature of Irish life is the beautiful country house. This is the famous Russboro house in Blessington, County Wicklow. It's south of Dublin. And these were the homes of many landlords, who many of them were quite troublesome during the time of the famine, but they lived a very elaborate life and had great estates with quite beautiful fixtures. This one at Russboro House is certainly the rival of any number of homes in England. Okay, next one. This would be an example of the interior. All of these are famous paintings. If Father Ian were with us, he could tell us who did them, but I'm sorry to say I'm not up on that. But you can see the elaborate nature of the fireplace and the furniture. And were you to see the ceiling, and in the original picture I had, you could see the ceiling, a beautiful, probably Waterford crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. And the ceiling is all done in, what do you call it, in plasterwork, which is very much a signature of Dublin houses. And Russboro isn't that far from Dublin. Very elaborate plasterwork. Next. Also on the River Liffey, you see the Center for Irish Criminal Justice. It's called the Four Courts. 4 different kinds of courts are located in that building, and that is where the Irish Supreme Court and other courts hold jurisdiction. Next. Even though Dublin was so beautiful during the late 1700s, so much so that it was called the second city of the empire, second only to London. You can imagine how that went over with Glasgow and Edinburgh and Cardiff. They probably didn't like any of that, or Manchester or Birmingham. But Dublin was without question the most sophisticated city in the United Kingdom at that time. But after 1800, and it went into effect in 1801, there was a political decision called the Act of Union, which dissolved the Irish Parliament. And with that, Ireland could send delegates to the Parliament in London, as could Scotland and Wales, but they did not have their own autonomy, and therefore they did not have their own capital that functioned really as a capital. And so there was a gradual decline into poverty. And so this is from more recent years, the end of the 1900s, but you can see that people are not as well off as they should be. It is interesting to note, I think, that Karl Marx, when he was writing Das Kapital in Berlin and envisioning the class warfare that would sweep communism into power throughout Europe, actually wrote about Dublin as being a likely source of it and one of the first to undertake revolution. But it never came to Ireland. Not the political revolution did, but the class warfare never did, nor did communism in that sense. I think somehow the bonds of community were too good in Ireland to sustain it, or maybe people were just out at too many other activities, so who knows. Next one, please, Patrice. So you can see poverty gripped the land throughout much of the 19th century. Then with the Irish famine, called by the Irish An Gorta Mór, it was followed by a lot of political unrest, rebellion, and so forth. Now here's an interesting view. This is the Custom House, which we just saw, with Ireland's only skyscraper, as far as I know. This is about 11 or 12 stories. The Irish government did not want a forest of skyscrapers. They wanted to keep Dublin's skyline interesting but manageable. One thing they did put up after they blew up quite a few years ago, back I think around 1966, when Ireland was celebrating its 50th anniversary of the Rising, they replaced the Nelson Pillar, which had Lord Nelson on top, with the Millennium Spire. So around the year 2000, this went up. It's a stainless steel spire that is the tallest, I think it is the tallest structure in Europe, or was anyway. Next. University College Dublin is another great university in the city. It is as modern as Trinity is traditional. Joyce was a graduate of UCD, and Ireland uses education as a stimulus for her development, which is a very intelligent way to do it. And the origins of University College Dublin go back to Cardinal Newman, who founded UCD as the Catholic University of Ireland. Later, it was called the Royal University of Ireland, and still later, it was called the National University of Ireland, with campuses in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, and Maynooth, as well as some associated colleges. Next. I used to walk through that area all the time. I had classes there. This is the Dublin Convention Center, a new building. It was where the Queen was received in 2011, Queen Elizabeth II, when it was a very important journey of reconciliation between the two cultures, British culture and Irish culture. Irish people tend to be rather fond of the Queen, and they certainly received her quite well. Next one. And so I don't know if we're at the end. I'm not sure if we are at the end. Can you tell me that, Patrice? Oh, no, we have some more. Okay. So these girls are Irish dancers. They don't belong in that particular position, so just forget them. They're very cute, and we'll talk about them in a minute. So next slide, please. This is that same convention center done up with neon at light. It's a very interesting place. A lot of activity there. And the bridge, if you notice it, I don't know if you can see it well enough, but it is actually shaped like a harp. The suspension comes from the bow of the harp. It's a beautiful design. Next. In redeveloping its quays and the docklands of the River Liffey leading out into the Irish Sea, there have been a lot of activity. This is a new theater that was erected there called the Grand Canal Theater. It's where the Grand Canal empties into the docklands area, waterways. So quite something there. And the next one I think will show us the interior. Beautiful new theater. Ireland has a very lively theater life. Dublin is maybe not quite as active as the West End in London, but it keeps up with London and Broadway, and there's many productions that are on almost every night in the days before the COVIDium. The most famous theater, of course, in Ireland is the Abbey Theater, which had a huge role in sparking interest in Irish history and culture and dance, we might say, back in the days just before the Rising in 2016. Next one. Everybody has seen groups in pubs, I would think, most people, and it is a perfect example of how, as the Irish phrase goes, Chol agus Craic, music and fun can be generated almost spontaneously, but all of these are usually excellent musicians who've practiced a long time. This drum that this lad here has here is called a boran drum, and it's a very traditional kind of musical instrument of the Irish. Next. Another aspect of of Irish culture are the writers, and they're both men and women who are doing a great deal of writing. Famous Lady Gregory. Mary Levin is a great short story writer. She's deceased now, but I knew Mary. I met her. I had a great chat with Mary Levin in the middle of the street one time, and the cars are going all around us, but she just stopped to talk, and I wasn't going to miss the opportunity to speak with one of these great Irish writers. Same thing with Edna O'Brien. I met Edna O'Brien at the Abbey Theater, and she is quite something. Very interesting woman. So all of those, they have stories to tell, but unfortunately, we're going to have to move on. But next one. And of course, the guys provide plenty of writers too. Singh, Swift, Beckett, Yeats, Paddy Kavanagh, Oscar Wilde, Brendan Behan, James Joyce, Sean O'Casey, George Bernard Shaw, Oliver Goldsmith, and Flann O'Brien, all very famous writers. It's been a pleasure to read their work and see their vision of Ireland, their vision of the human spirit. Very, very interesting. Next one. Now, these two lads, these are new to my world. I just happened to read about them earlier in the week, but John and Patrick Collison are living in America now, but they're Irish. John came, the lad on the left, came to go to, I believe, Harvard. And I don't know whether Patrick came over later or what, but they got started and they established a computerized online bill paying service called Stripe. And it was just valued at $93 billion. Father Bennett, I think we should get on them and see if one of them would like to be on the board of trustees of St. Anselm and make a contribution to Irish or Irish-Hungarian studies at our college. What do you think?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I got to find out where their headquarters are in Dublin and I think San Francisco is where they're. Of course, so many high-tech companies are headquartered in San Francisco and the Silicon Valley. But anyway, and you get in their faces, you get a good sense of often the look of the Irish, the darker one and the more red-haired one. Next one, please. Now, here's some lady dancers that you don't want to mess with. This is an American group, I believe, Trinity and Anselm. I think they've been at the Dana Center at St. Anselm, but they have a more modern look to them, but their dances are very athletic and very rigorous, but they're excellent dancers. And their work often tells the story of some dimension of Irish history or experience. Next one. And then the famous river dance. I'll tell you a quick story. We did a ceilidh for the Irish Club at the coffee shop many years ago, and somebody came in, "Oh, Father, you got to look at this. This is a new thing," and they just put it on the TV screen, and I was furious until I watched it, and I was stunned, and it was the first river dance. So we've been doing ceilidhs in the pub for quite a while at Christmas time, the Irish Club has. But this is a new iteration of the show. And next, and of course, the show was started by Michael Flatley and Jean Butler, who starred in Riverdance. And then they went on, I believe, I know Flatley did, I'm not sure if Jean Butler was in it as well. He did Lord of the Dance, which likewise was a very successful show. Really, during the height of the Celtic Tiger, Riverdance was making the rounds. And next one, please. So Irish step dancing is something that is another carrier of Irish culture, and it attracts tens of thousands of boys and girls around the world in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, of course in Ireland, but also in Australia, New Zealand, in Africa and Asia. And it's interesting to know that students in the Irish Club at St. Anselm, I have the privilege of serving as their advisor, have competed in national championships here in the United States, and some have become champions even on the international level at various different age competitions. One of the boys in our club danced throughout high school and college and landed a job in Riverdance. And you know Michael Bennett there.
Yes, Boyle.
Michael Boyle and his sisters were all excellent dancers. And Michael stayed in it. He's one of the few guys who stays in it. You usually kind of lose them in high school, but Michael stayed even in through college and now teaches it, I believe. Where is he doing it?
In Boston, the greater Boston area.
Greater Boston.
I think it's in Braintree, the studio,
Okay.
the Dunleavy Boyle studio.
But he does a great job. And for a number of years, he was in one of the traveling Riverdance shows. So next one, please. And then these are our current girls, dancers. They have their crazy Christmas sweaters on because they were dancing for the Christmas Ceilidh. And there they are. And they do a phenomenal job. They're all excellent in what they do. Next one. The Holly on the Harp is the name of the annual Irish Club Christmas Ceilidh. And there you see one of the groups. Professor Monty Brown is behind them. They're kind of the student jazz combo, but it is a great deal of fun. Just as we're ending exams and getting ready to go home for Christmas, the Irish Club has this massive Christmas party, which is what a Ceilidh is, and everybody gets to participate. I won't say that I've danced well, but I have danced at it, but usually I read a poem. Usually a poem from Yeats. Okay, next one. And our Irish dancers are ranked in the top 10 dance troupes in the United States in 2019, 2020 in the United States competition at Villanova. And they perform here for groups and parishes in schools, in schools throughout the area. And they even teach their fellow students some of the Irish step dancing. And we were meant to end with those little girls that we saw earlier, but I just would leave it at this, that it's important to pass on the things we value in culture. And I hope we do that. I also want to point out, I'm wearing my green. I'm also wearing my harp. This is the medallion. Hold on to your hat now. Don't be shocked. But you are listening to a Grand Marshal of the Manchester St. Patrick's Parade. Those days of glory came from 2011. I was very honored, and I still have this. And I have my sash, which I thought was perhaps a little bit much to wear for this. But I want to thank all of you, each and every one of you, for your participation in this Irish culture thing, what is it called? A webinar, I guess. It's been fun for me. It was fun putting it together. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Father Bennett knows our time situation, so.
Yeah, I think we're just about at the end of our time. So okay. I'll just thank you, Father Jerome, for this wonderful walk through Irish culture, the literature, architecture, education, gardens and everything else that we saw tonight was fantastic. All right. I just invite all of our guests to join us next week for our final installment in our All Things Celtic seminar, where we'll discuss, Father Jerome will discuss the Black and the Green, Frederick Douglass and Daniel O'Connell. So until next week, happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next week.
See you all later. God bless.
Thank you, Father Jerome. And thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.